Hello watch enthusiasts and welcome to Watch Chronicler. Until last year, I used to produce one video per month discussing several interesting, noteworthy and important watch releases over that preceding period. However, these videos stopped for a number of reasons, chief amongst which was the development of more in-depth reviews, but whilst I'll be dialing back slightly over the summer for personal reasons, I'd like to bring these episodes back with 5 of the most exciting and under-discussed new watches from the last month, from brands as varied as Seiko and Breguet, to less obvious candidates such as Zenith and Laventure. But before speaking about those watches, I'd like to give my thoughts on some of the most publicised watches, as well as those about which there is, for better or for worse, less to say as they remain just as important. Of course, this last month has seen the release of yet another Tudor Black Bay, this time the smaller 58, the 39mm model in bronze, down from the 43mm of the normal Black Bay bronze. As disappointed as I am to see yet another Black Bay rather than, for example, a Marine Nationale Pelagos, this watch is noteworthy for 2 key reasons. Firstly, it's a boutique edition, thus showing that Tudor is experimenting with limited supply in the face of very obvious demand. Secondly, the bracelet now has a glide lock-esque sliding adjustment and is itself also produced from bronze. Whilst no other Tudor yet has this particular clasp, and Tudor seem to have been very wary about using bronze in their bracelets until now, as they haven't offered their bronze Black Bays on such bracelets until this point, we can probably expect this clasp to appear sooner or later on their other models after the baptism of fire the highly reactive world of bronze bracelets will have given it. Secondly, Omega have chosen to update their Seamaster Aqua Terra collection with a small seconds model, an arguably more formal option in both 38 and 41mm diameters. As you might expect, this version uses a peripheral version of either the 8800 series movement, with its quick set date, single spring barrel and 55-hour power reserve, or the larger 8900 series movement, with its freely adjustable hour hand and twin barrels delivering a 60-hour power reserve in the larger cased version. Of course, these models are available in a plethora of configurations, from dark-dialed steel versions to others with delicate diamond-studded dials on a precious metal case. There really is considerable variety, and I can see why Omega would want to add this to their collection, although it does make the world of Seamaster watches all the more confusing. Finally, Oris has immeasurably widened the appeal of its in-house Calibre 400 Aquis dive watch with a 41.5mm version of this existing 43.5mm watch, with its 5-day power reserve and of course proprietary movement. It's hardly a wild change, but enough to make what is, most will agree, an increasingly serious, upmarket and beautifully made dive watch a more obvious option for a wider range of wrists. This is particularly important when this model, with its higher price, is starting to compete with the incredibly size-conscious brand which is Tudor. But before I start talking about the key watches in this video, please remember to like, share and subscribe if you haven't already, because it really does help the channel and makes sure that you always catch the latest episodes. Also, if you want to catch full articles and podcasts, head over to watchchronicler.com, the very centre of Watch Chronicler productions. But now for a watch I'd like to discuss properly, the Seiko Prospex 1986 Quartz Divers 35th Anniversary Limited Edition, a very confusing name for essentially a Seiko tuner. Now the Seiko tuner has a very committed and enthusiastic following as the only true remaining example of the wild and wildly technically impressive dive watches of the 1970s. Following the 1975 release of what is now known as the Grandfather tuner, the first titanium dive watch with a 600m water resistance and a high beat Grand Seiko movement, the 6159 movement, which in fact gave its name to this watch, Seiko moved to a more accurate, more reliable quartz movement in a 1000m water resistant case, complete with gold-coloured elements, the result of a tough titanium nitride coating. To celebrate the 35th anniversary of what was, at the time, probably the most serious dive watch in the world, Seiko has launched an anniversary model based very closely on the recently updated 1000m tuner dive watch collection. The aforementioned new generation is perhaps the best in memory for an anniversary model, as 2 generations ago, Seiko essentially replicated the original in modern form before entirely modernising it with new hands and a new dial. For this most recent iteration, Seiko has brought back the distinctive hour and minute hands as well as the circular dial markers, but with a comprehensively modern touch. With that being said, the emphasis has really been with the automatic version of this watch in recent years, yet as a tool the somewhat smaller at 49.4mm, yes I know it's still enormous, lighter and thinner quartz model makes the most sense, not to mention being a much more affordable watch too. Technically speaking, this tuner is perhaps as close to the original as you could reasonably expect with a similar monoblock titanium case which is both resistant to gas entry, thus removing the need for a helium escape valve, and to 1,000 meters of water pressure, whilst a flat sapphire crystal and ceramic shroud bring modern toughness. In fact, even the 7C46 quartz movement with its 5-year power reserve and end-of-life indicator has been preserved from the original because ultimately it's still the best tool for the job. With this new limited edition of 1,200 pieces, you don't get any kind of replica of the original. Instead you receive a much more crisp-looking product with a gradient blue-black dial similar to that of both the Rolex Deep Sea James Cameron edition and Page & Cooper's Zinn Blue 1 collaboration from a few years ago. Paired with yellow on the second-hand dial and crown, the look is, I think, fantastic, even if this watch is marginally more expensive than the basic, off-the-shelf version. But with its gold case screws and decorative dial, is this piece still really a tool? Well, these Seikos are known for having a water resistance often 3 times the rated depth, but ultimately you've got to love this watch to get serious utility from it. Ultimately though, if you want a tool, spend 1/3 as much and buy the 300 meter water resistant variant instead, because frankly, it is the more practical choice. Now moving from a major corporation and a watch for the abyss to a small upstart with a watch for the shallows. We have the new Laventure Marine II. Launched by Clément Gault, the Laventure brand is one which has, I confess, inhabited my wishlist for quite some time. This is a brand which focuses on a Jules Verne-esque aesthetic of exploration on, high above and beneath the waves, somewhere between timelessness and steampunk. It's an odd thought, but the juxtaposition of a loosely Patek Philippe Nautilus-inspired 40.5mm case, richly coloured sandwich dial, with deliciously simple hands and a level of detail far exceeding the obsessive, Laventure have encapsulated the feeling of the late 19th century's innovation in the music of Erik Satie and the magic of Debussy's La Mer. Oh, and their watches are of course 100% Swiss, a major appeal. Thus far, Laventure have produced the Marine, a watch with 200 meter water resistance and a simple steel bezel, the Sous-Marine which added a stunning solid caseback and a rotating bezel, and most recently the Transatlantique GMT, a GMT function watch with a plexiglass crystal and a truly sumptuous bezel. Following the success of these watches, Laventure have brought back the original Marine as the Marine II, but with a few key changes. Firstly, the steel bracelet of the Transatlantique is now an option, thus giving a comprehensively different character, whilst the tall plexiglass crystal of that watch is also featured. Secondly, the back of the watch has changed, as gone is the ETA 2824 of old, and in its place is a Sellita SW200, a controversial choice, but one I can understand given ETA's known supply headaches. Thirdly, the very caseback covering that movement is now solid, a wise choice, and rather than showing the movement, you have a lovely nautical scene. It's perhaps not quite as handsome as those of the Sous-Marine and the Transatlantique, but I think it's still a fantastic improvement. All of these revisions, however, pale into insignificance next to the dial, a solid 18-karat gold piece which is brushed from top to bottom and which, structurally speaking, is very comparable to those already seen from the brand. Even so, there are some really delightful details of note beyond the fact that a brand's first use of gold is always a milestone. Look at the hallmarks. This watch replaces the bottom half dial text with hallmarks engraved into the dial, including a scale for the alloy, a St. Bernard for Switzerland, and a little octopus for the Laventure brand. It's a really very simple product, but an extremely satisfying one too when you notice that the date has disappeared from the dial from its original position at 4:30. The only question now to ask, academic though it is after all 99 pieces have sold, is whether this watch is worth the asking price of 3,850 francs before tax. No good watch should ever be the sum of its parts, and in the case of the Marine II, it obviously isn't, as, for the first time, we see Laventure bringing a level of luxury and a totally different emphasis to their now recognisable style. Would I buy one? Probably not, since Laventure is the kind of brand which, in my opinion, one could never be satisfied owning just one example of, yet I can certainly see the appeal, and I think this is a very promising new direction. But now it's time for another wistful glance in the past direction, with the Breguet Type XXI reference 3815, a revised version of an unusual pilot's watch. Ask any watch lover about the Breguet Type 20, and they'll tell you about a flyback military pilot's watch from the 1950s, but the Type 21 is a bit of a red herring. In actual fact, the Type 21 was originally a follow-up specification from the French Air Force in the 1950s, yet that really has nothing to do with this new chronograph. You see, Type 21 is also Breguet's in-between model in their aviation range. For the purist, and indeed for most buyers, you have the Type 20, which, whilst far more ornate than originally intended, has the traditional 3 subdials in a normal chronograph arrangement. For more extreme tastes, the Breguet Type 22 is offered, with its unique flyback chronograph movement operating at a scarcely believable 72,000 vibrations per hour to the 28,800 of most modern Swiss movements. This is achieved with a tiny magnetically levitating balance wheel, silicon springs, and a second hand running around the dial in 30 rather than 60 seconds. Between these two, however, is a sweet spot, the Type 21. Retaining the classical look of the normal flyback Type 20, the Type 21 adds a central chronograph minute hand and a somewhat more exuberant appearance, but until now it strayed too far from the original watch for many buyers. With this year's reference 3815, Breguet have returned some well-needed simplicity to this aviation icon. The 42mm case is retained, but is now no longer polished steel or gold, but brushed titanium. The rotating bezel is deeply textured and black for improved contrast, the dial is now flat, and the subdials now number just 2, with the chronograph hours removed. Still, the key features remain, such as the exquisite automatic flyback chronograph movement, central chronograph minute hand, and even the oversized 1920s-style Arabic numerals, which drop their metallic borders in favour of intense green or orange. I'd have the green, but which would you choose? But why is this watch of real interest? Well, the Type 21 and Type 22 are seriously under-discussed, given their less iconic status in the Breguet collection, and by simplifying and adding individuality, Breguet seem to have created real interest around this new and very striking watch. Additionally, given the success of Omega's handmade Ed White Speedmaster, appreciation for real, high horology chronograph movements with impeccable finishing in the price range north of £10,000 has increased, and so this Breguet might have a newfound and fully deserved appeal. For the second chronograph featured in this video, I might have spoken about the HABRING and Monochrome Montres de Souscription, which, entirely sold out, looks like a really delightful piece. But the more important watch is the Zenith Chronomaster Original. Let's be quite honest, Zenith releases far too many limited editions of the El Primero for any to have an easy time of differentiating themselves. However, the Chronomaster Original might be the most successful to date because it pairs a revised version of the case of the reference A386 from 1969, the watch which defined the El Primero's look for the subsequent half-century, with a movement of a new generation with entirely new features. In recent years, Zenith has launched a lot of interesting and appealing El Primero spin-offs, most of which aimed for either the prospective new or vintage Rolex Daytona buyer. This watch, though, really is the next generation of the original rather than any such offshoot. As such, it has the same neat, tidy lines and slight quaintness as the original in a 38mm size, with a slim 12.6mm thickness for an automatic chronograph, as well as absolutely phenomenal case brushing. Of this, 3 unlimited versions are offered, 2 with the iconic El Primero grey and blue tri-compact dial arrangement in either steel or gold, and one with a rather understated and very handsome reverse panda dial. It's also clear that Zenith have really paid attention to the details across the whole piece, as the delicate text and slightly old-fashioned feel of the original watch remain clear. Inside, though, we have a very different beast, as, based on the original 50-plus-year-old movement, is the Zenith El Primero 3600. This 35-jewel automatic chronograph keeps all the things we love about the original movement, including the old-school lateral clutch and column wheel pairing, and high 36,000 vibration per hour beat rate. To this it adds a long 60-hour power reserve, and most importantly, a high-speed second hand. By this I mean that, where the original watch rotates the second hand once around the dial each minute, this watch has one central second hand which revolves once every 10 seconds, and a second hand on a sub-dial to display normal chronograph seconds. As such, this watch displays very clearly tenths of a second, which is key to the fact that this watch actually runs at 10 beats per second, so you're getting the maximum out of the movement. With prices starting at £7,100, a very rich history and serious, noticeable innovation, not a new material for a part which you can't see or feel, this watch makes much more sense than the Rolex Daytona, especially when the Zenith dealer actually wants your business, and may even be an interesting Omega Speedmaster alternative. I'd certainly consider it. Finally, I'd like to present the most affordable watch of the video, and one which deserves to be included for curiosity's sake, quite aside from being an exciting looking piece. This is the Jacques Bianchi JB200, a rare return of a dive watch creator who, now in his 80s, catered to the greats including Jacques Cousteau, Comex and the French Navy. You see, based in Marseille, Bianchi was key to the repair of the roughly used watches of the aforementioned parties, and in the 1980s even launched his own dive watches. Offered with a relatively nondescript case adopted by other brands such as Heuer and CWC in period after the 1960s Omega Seamaster 300, the original watch had a 200 meter water resistance, similar hands to those used by Yema and Vostok, and a quartz movement to give toughness in the age of such movements. Uniquely, Bianchi's watches also showed a depiction of a diver on the dial as a watch genuinely used by French frogmen or combat divers. This year, with the help of the man behind French military watch brand MAT, an abbreviation for Mer, Air, Terre, Jacques Bianchi is relaunching this watch at his relatively old age. The new watch is a remarkably faithful remake of the original, with many of the same specifications, with the notable exception of the movement. That's now a Seiko NH35, which, whilst pretty pedestrian with a 40-hour power reserve and 3 Hz beat rate, delivers exactly the low-cost toughness you'd want in a tool watch. For a price of €595, this watch makes no mistake of the fact that it's a tool watch. It doesn't waste time with additional nonsense and sticks to a perfectly useful depth rating, and instead gives you a fully luminous bezel, sapphire crystal, and the benefit of a left-hand crown. With the heritage behind this piece, and the true connection to the original maker, if the JB200 is well made, it'll be a very exciting piece to own. I'll conclude the video there, but please let me know which pieces were your favourites in the comment section below. Thank you very much for watching, and remember to like, subscribe, and to hit the bell icon to always catch the latest videos and to support the channel. This is Armon from WatchChronicler.com, out.